I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 Facebook group. And I'm here tonight with Chris Abkarians from Juno. And I'm going to let Chris introduce himself in a little bit, and we're going to talk to you about Juno. But the focus of tonight's talk is really to start to share with people this concept of, can you negotiate your financial aid award? And if you choose to do it, what type of process you would need to go through. So I'm glad that people are here tonight. I would love to know in the chat, and I assume a lot of people, who are here are parents with seniors. So just kind of confirm that for us, and let us know if your student has gotten an offer, has gotten acceptance and then an offer, if they've gotten financial aid or merit scholarship. And they may not have made a decision, and that's perfectly fine, but just kind of curious how many people, if their student has already had that information, kind of where they are in the process. And to give you a little bit of housekeeping about tonight, this is officially a webinar. Sorry, this is officially a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. And I only say that because you've come in muted, but if you really want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and also put any questions and comments in the chat. This is recorded, and we always send out the link to the recording tomorrow. And I see a few people are already on video, are showing their video. So thank you. It's always nice to see some faces if anybody wants to turn on their video instead of the black box. Thank you. It's just nice to see who's out there. And Chris has slides. He's going to walk us through. I will probably interrupt him with some questions, as he's talking through the topic. But anything we don't get to, we will look at the questions at the end and try and talk and answer as many questions as possible. And Chris and I have done this several times on this topic and other topics related to loans in general. And he's very generous with his time. So, we will stay on as long as we can to answer questions at the end. So, Chris, let me pass it to you. And, if you want to share a little bit about your background, a little bit about Juno, and then we can also talk about Juno at the end as well.
Well, Debbie, thank you very much for hosting again, and thank you everybody for making some time this evening to learn about negotiating financial aid awards. Quick background on myself. I first had to negotiate a financial aid package for undergrad at this point quite a long time ago. And then I attempted to, but was unsuccessful in trying to negotiate my financial aid award for business school. But while I was there, I still needed money. So I started this company called Juno, which we'll tell you more about at the end, but is a collective bargaining group for student loans. And so the general idea back then was I bundled together a few hundred of my classmates who needed to get loans at the same time. And we asked lenders if they'd be willing to negotiate on the rates and terms they offered to the group instead of us one by one. That worked out really well. And so for the last couple of years, we expanded that concept to all schools in the US. I'll tell you a little bit more about where we are in that process at the end. I've become a little bit of an expert in most topics related to FAFSA, Student Aid Index, negotiating financial aid, and understanding federal grants and loans. So really any question that you might have as we go through this webinar, please ask it in that chat box. We'll pause here and there on slides to try to get to whichever ones are relevant to that section. And if there's ones that I haven't been able to hit, you might say at the end of the presentation. And very honestly, if there's questions that take us beyond the amount of time that we have tonight, I'm happy to answer them one-on-one over email or phone calls over the next couple of days as well. So you'll get a copy of this deck. You'll get a copy of the recording of this webinar tomorrow. And I'll include some of my contact information as well as a few links that I'll talk through as we go through this presentation. And so if for any reason you need to drop off tonight, please don't worry. We'll make sure that you get everything you need. With that, let's just get a quick overview on tonight's agenda. We're going to spend about 5 minutes recapping the timeline for financial aid awards, where you are in the cycle, what you'll need to know moving forward. We'll spend about 10 minutes on merit-based financial aid appeals, and about 30 minutes on need-based appeals. And even if you think this might not apply to you, I highly recommend that you stay for this piece, because there are aspects of need-based appeals that apply to people who might not even think that their family's financial situation would make them eligible for financial aid. And we'll talk through those. And I'll give you a quick 5-minute intro to Juno, and we'll save as much time as needed for Q&A. So to start off with, here's a general overview of the timeline for financial aid. The FAFSA for anybody going to college in fall of this year opened last month. And so if you haven't already filled it out, you might want to look into doing that relatively soon. There's another webinar that Debbie has a recording of on her channel, walking through some key tips and tricks to know about filling that out. About 1 to 3 days after you complete FAFSA, you'll get your student.
So it's all FAFSA.
Sorry, go ahead,
It's okay.
Chris.
So about 1 to 3 days after you fill out FAFSA, you're going to get a number. And that number is called a student aid index. By itself, it doesn't mean anything. I'm going to talk through in about 20 minutes how it impacts your need-based financial aid. So don't worry right now about needing to know anything about that. We also have a completely separate webinar on that for anybody who's more curious to go back and watch how it's calculated. Likely, many folks have already applied to college, or your children have applied to college, or will do so over the course of the next couple of days and weeks. And what's important to know for tonight is that over the next couple of weeks, you may start receiving financial aid packages. In some cases, people might have even already gotten them. Most people will start getting them in March and April. And quickly after that is when you would consider looking into financial aid appeals. And so tonight's conversation is really focused on this stage, just getting you prepared for understanding what a financial aid appeal is, the different types of appeals that exist, and the various reasons why you might be allowed to appeal. So we're going to go through both merit-based and need-based aid appeals, but I'll start off with just one overall message, which is when you get that letter, I'd really encourage you to view it as a first draft and not a final draft. Often somebody might get a financial aid award letter and it might feel daunting to see the amount of money that you have to pay for you or your children to go to school for that upcoming year. But there are things that you might be able to do to reduce the amount that you have to pay out of pocket to make that school work. And that's really the focus of tonight's conversation. And so we're going to start off talking about merit-based appeals. And when I say merit-based, it's about leveraging your students' achievements to get more financial aid, especially if they've been admitted to 2 or more programs. And especially if one of those programs has provided more aid, but your student actually wants to go to a different program that maybe did not provide as much aid. So we'll go through some strategies for how to do that. And then we'll spend the bulk of the discussion on need-based aid, which is really about how can you provide incremental information to the financial aid office to recalculate the amount of aid that you might be eligible for, because what the financial aid office sees might not be a complete picture of your financial situation. And that's because they're looking at FAFSA, and FAFSA, by its design, omits certain very important things that you might have wanted to be able to include. Both of these types of appeals might apply to each person. Sometimes it might be only one of these 2 types of appeals that will apply. And so a lot of this will be relevant for most people. So just start off with merit-based appeals. Really what this means is a merit-based award for college financial aid is, put simply, the school is providing a discount or a scholarship or a grant for you or your student to enroll after they admitted. And each school, some schools don't really have a budget for this. Many schools have a large budget for this. And in many cases, they're kind of expecting at least some portion of people to come back and try to negotiate the amount of aid that they're being provided. What you're really doing here is haggling over the cost. And often people don't feel comfortable doing it, but it's in your best interest to do so. So where it works best is if you've been admitted to more than one program, and especially if another program has provided more aid. And so if you really zero in on the program that you or your child want to attend most, it'll make this process a little bit easier. And we'll talk in a minute about how you can craft a letter to help them want to give you a little bit more financial help to make this work. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie for the next slide because she and her team have compiled a really valuable resource that walks through different types of offers that people have gotten for different schools to get their aid packages.
Yeah, I actually was just posting for people who had said that their student has already gotten offers and asking if they've put it into our compare offers tool. So I got to tell you, we started this, I don't know, like 7 years ago, honestly, from our Facebook group. And at the time, we just did it as a spreadsheet, like a Google sheet, and had people share their offers. And obviously, we got a little bit more sophisticated over time and put it into a website. But if your student has acceptances, they may not even have their offers yet because of, you don't always get all the financial aid information at the same time you get an acceptance. But if you have an acceptance, you should go to, it's compareoffers.roadtocollege.com and enter your student's profile information and then enter their offer. And you get two benefits. One is you can, if you do have actual merit scholarships or financial aid, you can compare in an apples to apples way your own students' offers to kind of to help you see what the net cost is at the schools, and you can compare among all the schools you have, and then you can go and see for the schools that you've entered. You can go look at the other offers that other families have entered in that for that school, and that's really helpful. You can see this year it's kind of like it's building live, so some schools have a lot more depending if they've already sent out their decisions, and we definitely get more in in the mid-February to mid-March range. You can also go back to previous years. I would definitely look at last year's, maybe 2 years. I'm not sure if I would go back past, I mean, you can look at past 2 years, but I wouldn't make any major decisions or judgments based on data from 2 years or older, because the colleges sometimes do make shifts in how they give money. But definitely the past 2 years look at, and you can see who's getting money, how whatever dollar amounts are being offered, how it compares to what your student has or hasn't been offered, and also look at those students' profiles. We have, what state they are from. Sometimes location might impact money that a school is willing to offer. Obviously, look at their stats, their GPA, their if they've submitted a test score. So the way that this is set up, it allows us, the student or the person entering the information tells us if the student took a test score, and then school by school, they can tell us if they actually submitted the test score, and that information is shown as part of the comparison. And you can get a sense of what your student might have been offered. Is that kind of in the range that a student that looks similar from an academic profile is also receiving? And this just, in a lot of cases in previous years, it was clear that a student got on the lower end of the range that students were receiving at a particular school. And sometimes it just confirmed that maybe that student was getting, the best offer that they could possibly get. But it definitely can give you a sense of, should we appeal? Honestly, from maybe what you're going to hear tonight, my advice is somewhat, if you're willing to spend maybe the hour that it will take to pull the information together, I think it's always worth appealing, because the worst response that you're going to, or the worst response you're going to get is a no, and you're still in the same position as you were before. And the best response is you might get a little bit of money and more money. So, but this maybe might give you some encouragement by looking at other people's offers, whether or not to move forward and asking the school for more aid. So, Chris, Kevin you have your hand raised. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I did, and thank you for recognizing. My quick question is this: Chris had mentioned in his slide earlier that financial aid packages will be sent typically in March, April. So each of the acceptances that my three have gotten thus far, they've ranged from mentioning nothing about a scholarship or a grant to almost full tuition. And so we're very lucky in that and thankful. Should I expect then these schools to actually come back with the financial aid that goes along with those grants at some point in time? Or am I in a position right now to start doing this kind of, hey, my kid got this much money to go to this school and you're his favorite, so we would like to see more from you? Or is it worth waiting until they send this financial aid package? So I want to understand the timing a little bit better and what's most advantageous for us.
It's a great question. Thanks for asking it. There's not a best answer here. You could do it now. You could wait to get the package and see exactly how much that school is going to offer you. That I would slightly bias towards maybe doing it now for one reason only, and that's the financial aid office might be slightly less busy before they send out all of their offers, where a bunch of people might then be trying to respond to them, versus now when they might still be really busy putting everyone's financial aid package together. But at least they'll feel some obligation because you reached out first, or maybe they'll have some downtime before they send everything out. They have a chance to respond to you earlier.
I would add that for the schools that you've gotten, it sounds like you've gotten merit offers, but you're not quite sure if you're going to get any financial aid from those schools. I would definitely call or email or both the financial aid office and just find out, have they sent out financial aid information? Because it may be that it's always a little tricky, because you don't know if you just didn't get any, like so you ask them if all that is all that you've received, like everything that's going to be sent out, or should you be waiting? Are you still potentially going to get some information for need-based aid, and then base your decision on that, about whether or not you should move forward with an appeal. And I agree with Chris, the earlier you can do it, the better, because the offices just won't get overloaded. But just find out, are they still going to potentially send you more information, or they're done with what they're sending you.
Yeah.
Chris, we have one more question from Holly. Oh, Holly, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, we should know that by now, shouldn't we? Thank you. And if you're going to get to this later, you don't have to answer it now. But one is it better to call or write on your first go round? And the other one is, is the question about the NPCs, the net price calculators. I ran it for the school recently that my daughter was just accepted to, and we got the award letter actually right before this call. And the net price calculator, gave us a price that's like $30,000 less than what the award is. She did a little merit aid. So I'm putting that out there to see how to contend with the net price calculator, and also how to approach it in writing or by a call. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. I'll start with the second piece, and Debbie, please add on if there's anything that you care to. But the net price calculators are notoriously inaccurate. There's many more variables that go into determining your need-based aid, which is what those are really trying to estimate. Then and those tools only have a few things for you to be able to enter to see what your estimated net price would be. And so they're a very rough estimate with a very wide error band. In terms of, we'll touch in a second, I think in just one slide on writing some of the strategies for how to reach out. So I'll just save that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Chris in that the net price calculators, you know, they're giving you a guide, an estimate, but 30,000 is a big gap, you know, from what you might have, you know, put in the net price calculator to what they sent you. Of course, there is no guarantee, you know, of what the answer to the net price calculator is what the college is going to offer you. And they could also claim, you know, hey, we don't know if you entered in your information accurately or not. But, and I don't know if you have this or not. Did you save? Like, we actually recommend if people are running the net price calculator to take a screenshot. Did you? Okay, that's great.
And of all the information that I inputted.
Okay. You know, just keep this, and I would potentially, you know, include this in some sort of an appeal, because that's significantly off. So, you know, again, you can't force the colleges to give what the net price calculator said because it's just an estimate, but it make them at least feel guilty that it was kind of misleading.
Thank you.
So I'll move on a little bit just to make sure, and thank you a lot for the questions and engagement, and we'll make sure to get to as many of these as we can. When it comes to the merit appeals process, really this kind of comes down to what's a decent letter as the first step that you could send to the financial aid office and or the administration. And there's really a few key things to keep in mind. And then on the next slide, we'll just show you a template that you could theoretically use that some other people have used. So it really does help to express enthusiasm about that school that you're trying to get to give you more money. And so that's kind of how we'll frame that next slide and the example letter. And if there's things you can mention that convince this school that if they move and give you more money, that you're very likely to actually enroll and accept that, this makes it more likely that they'll invest the time in doing that. If you can provide information about competing offers or about maybe any new achievements that your child has achieved since the initial application, honestly, that could help quite a bit as well. They're in many cases looking for a reason to help you. If you have another offer of admission and you're able to, you have an idea in your mind for how much more aid you think you would actually need in order to make it worthwhile to go to this school versus another, it's perfectly okay to share some broad numbers. But just make sure that in this process, you are being, avoid exaggerating something that wouldn't be believable by the person reading that letter, and don't make it an ultimatum, as in you would threaten to withdraw the offer of admission if certain things aren't met. That just won't really get you anywhere. And tomorrow when we send through the link to this deck, you'll also just have a link to this template. This might be too long of a letter. I would certainly personalize it, but I just wanted to put something forward that you might be able to share as a starting point. And really, this is just a starting point. This is you putting to writing the things that would help a financial aid administrator reconsider the amount of merit-based aid you should be allocated. And Holly, to the example you were sharing before, I would absolutely include screenshots of the net price calculator in a letter like this, and then have that letter be the first thing that you do send. So really the process on the merit appeals is, this is what we see people do. There's not It's a very formalized process at every school for exactly how you must do it. If it were me, I would send the letter first. I would send that letter typically after receiving multiple offers. But really, to the statement I made 10 minutes ago, if you have multiple offers of admission, but you don't have all of your financial aid offers yet, it could still be okay to ask for, to let another school know that you've gotten a large amount of merit aid from another place already, and you want to know where you're going to end up with them. If you're not hearing anything back within about 2 weeks to that email, absolutely worth it to call the financial aid office. You can call them even earlier if you want to make sure that they got your letter and ask if there's a process. But if it's been 2 weeks already, I would just give them a call and ask if you can move the conversation forward or set up a meeting to figure out what next steps could look like. Who to contact is a little bit gray. At some schools, it would be, I'd say most of the time it would be the financial aid office. Sometimes it will be the admissions office. The merit aid budget can be sitting with different groups depending on the school that you're looking at. So merit aid appeals, you could kind of contact both if you really want to. For need-based appeals, which we'll talk about, it'll be just going through the financial aid office. And to Debbie's point earlier, the most important takeaway here is that the worst thing that can happen is that they'll say no. There's no negative ramification. They're not going to do anything. The best outcome is that you'll get significantly more money. Another possible outcome is that you'll get a little bit more money. And the worst outcome is that you did waste an hour of time and got nothing. So if there's just one lesson from the merit appeal side, I couldn't agree more strongly with Debbie that it's in most people's interest, a significant percentage of the time, to just appeal anyway. If you're listening right now, you're going to be part of the minority and subset of people who do take that step to appeal their aid. And so you might have a little bit of an edge. A lot of schools might have some additional money that they're able to allocate. If you're not the one asking for it, somebody else probably is, and they'll just get that money instead. Just going to scroll to see if there's any questions we should hit before we move on to need-based aid.
Well, actually, Chris, a few people have asked, like what type of other school they should use as an offer. If let's say the student might have several offers, which one of those offers should they use? Is it going to be less effective if the school that they use as a comparison maybe isn't as strong academically or rankings wise as the school that they're asking more money from?
This is a very good question, and I'll just give you my quick perspective on this. This is in many ways a negotiation, and it is to your advantage to strategically share information. So let's say version 1 of the world is the school that you are comparing to is very similarly ranked or has some other reason for the financial aid administrator you're talking to believe that your student would clearly go there if they gave you more money. In that case, I would personally mention that school's name. If that's not the case, then I would just avoid mentioning the name of the school. Perhaps say another school that has a very good program in X, which my student is also very interested in. And just don't volunteer information that might make it less likely or give that financial aid officer a reason to not give you that additional.
The only other thing I would add is if you're appealing, particularly for merit money to a school and asking a school for more money, I would kind of have this discussion with your child beforehand. There's a good likelihood if they increase the aid that your student will end up going there. Because I think that, and if you can get that across in the letter, then you might have a better chance of the school offering money. I mean, ultimately, I know somebody posted in the chat, that they were told by somebody else not to use the word negotiation. Sure, I wouldn't use the word negotiate in the actual letter, but the reality is that, this is a form of, negotiation, however you want to look at it. And the college wants to feel that if we're going to give this student more, then we're doing it because we really want that student to yield and come. And so, so I guess I would kind of use your appealing strategically, to talk to, maybe one or two of the schools that your student is most interested in going to. I wouldn't kind of like use this along with all of your students' schools, and really get across in the letter that if they can increase the aid, or the merit, that there's a very strong possibility that your student will accept and enroll, because this is really one of their top choices. I think that type of a feeling really goes a long way when the when the admissions office is looking at these types of requests, because again, they have to make their numbers. And so they're thinking, okay, maybe this student is kind of close to making a decision. We can just push them over the edge by giving them a little bit more.
And I see a question that's been asked a few times about who should make the appeal, the parent or the student. So some schools will actually say that they'll only talk to the student about it. And some will let the parent initiate the appeal process as well. So if there's a very heartfelt letter that can come from a student that explains why they need a little bit more money to be able to go, that could work really well. If it's the parent doing it as well, some schools, I mean, honestly, most financial administrators understand that the parent is the one whose finances are really at stake here and might want to share a letter directly that's not going through the student. And so if you feel more comfortable doing this yourself instead of the student doing it, you can absolutely try to do it that way first, but just be prepared that some schools do take the view that the student has to be the one to talk to them.
Yeah, if your student is appealing solely for merit, and you didn't get any need-based aid, and you're not going to really get any need-based aid, I have seen that the appeals tend to work out a little better if the student it comes from the student. Doesn't mean the student's writing it all by themselves. You're definitely behind the scenes helping them, but if it's signed by the student, it comes from the student's email address, it does give a little bit more sense of genuine interest from the student. So and definitely, as Chris is saying, if it's purely a need-based aid appeal, which we're going to go into a little bit more, those tend to be much more financially oriented for specific reasons. Those are perfectly fine that they come from the parent, because usually it's like parent information that needs to be discussed. So just keep that in mind. And then somebody is asking, they said they had gone to an admitted student webinar and the school told them not to mention other offers. Is this common? I have to say, I've really never heard of a school saying, don't tell us about other offers. Some schools will actually flat out say, we won't change our offer. I mean, and they're signaling upfront that they're not going to accept any sort of appeals other than financial aid appeals. But so is the question, is this common? I don't really think so. Maybe that school wants to be upfront and saying, we just don't want to hear about other offers. I've actually seen it a little bit more the opposite, that schools are interested to know what the other offers are that the student is dealing with, because it gives them a sense of really what they are up against, what the student is making a decision about. But and this is David is the person who wrote in the chat. If the school specifically said don't mention the offers, then for that school I wouldn't. But it doesn't mean that you can't mention offers for other schools.
Good point. I'm going to move on just quickly to need-based aid to make sure that we can finish in time, but we'll save plenty of time for more questions. So need-based aid is calculated based on inputs from your FAFSA application. And I'll show you a slide in a minute and just how that math actually works. But the key thing to know here is that FAFSA doesn't capture everything. It's a snapshot of just select data that they ask you about. And when we talk about need-based appeals, what we're really saying is, how do we give the financial aid office access to more information than what they get through FAFSA so that they can reconsider the inputs that go into calculating how much aid you might be eligible for. And so we'll spend a few minutes going through kind of a structure like what you see on the slide. We're going to cover how need-based aid gets calculated, some of the shortcomings for the FAFSA inputs. We're going to go through 3 slides of some of the more common reasons why you'd be allowed to appeal and what you would need to collect in order to appeal those reasons, and then the actual process itself. And so just to start out with, when you get your financial aid award letter, you would typically see something like the cost of attendance as the first line or a line on there. And that would be the cost of tuition, the sticker price, put another way. And that sticker price includes an estimate of what it would cost to live at that school and to eat there. And so think of that sticker price as line 1. There's a bunch of inputs that go into FAFSA, and those result in a number called student aid index, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then you just subtract that from that cost of attendance, and that equals your financial need. This number doesn't mean that's exactly how much aid you're going to get, but it's the official way to at least estimate how much overall financial need is there for that family applying. And so forgive me if I'm going into a little bit too much detail, but I think it's valuable to set the context to just understand what is the financial aid office looking at and why are the reasons that I'll tell you about in a minute able to impact the amount of aid you might be eligible for. So the key thing to remember here is that when you fill out FAFSA, there's really 3 buckets of things. I'm simplifying a bit here, but 3 buckets of things that impact the student aid index number that FAFSA outputs. There's income data about the household, there's information about the family's assets, and there's information about the family size. And within each of those 3 sections of FAFSA, there's some data that you can provide and some data that you might want to provide, but there's no space to put information about. And all of that goes into FAFSA, you hit submit, and then there's a formula on the back end that calculates this student aid index number. The financial aid office uses that student aid index number to determine how much financial need your family has. And so it's in your best interest to, at least for the next few minutes, think about, is there something that might be relevant to me from the different types of reasons why someone could appeal that would allow the financial aid office to change the inputs that go into this calculation. So the drawbacks of FAFSA are fundamentally that in each of those 3 buckets I just spoke about, there's really important things that might not get considered. And most people might think there's nothing they can do about this. That's just wrong. I'm going to give you 3 really quick examples. I'll pause for questions because I know this can get a little bit complicated. And then we'll go through 12 pretty specific reasons why you could appeal. So example 1, FAFSA looks at income data, but it's using data from your 2023 tax return. This is for anybody who is filling out FAFSA now for the fall academic year. And so if your income for the household has materially changed, especially to the downside since 2023, then that's one reason why you might be able to appeal. On the family assets section of FAFSA, there's what that's meant to do is help the financial aid office through that formula determine how much overall assets from the family are available to help pay for college. But when that calculation gets run, there's no way for them to consider things like high medical expenses or chronic diseases in the family that might also drain on those resources and make them less accessible for paying for college. And so those are a couple of other reasons why they might consider an appeal. And then there's a family size section, which asks you if there's multiple children who are going to college at the same time. And by default, before last year, FAFSA also had this question. And if you had multiple children who were going to college at the same time, then the amount that you'd have to pay to go to college was reduced a little bit. Now that's no longer considered, but that's a reason why you're allowed to appeal. It's a quirk. I have no idea why things are set up that way, but this applies to a lot of people who aren't aware that they could answer this question, but it doesn't make any impact on their FAFSA unless they actively appeal to have the school consider that. I'm going to pause here just for a minute, and then we'll go through the actual reasons. Kevin has a question. Do you, Debbie, mind unmuting him? I can't see it right now.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Yep. Go ahead. Oops, Kevin,
Okay.
sorry.
All right, that's all right. You and I are
Yeah.
muting and unmuting. So Chris, again, my question about the timing. So this one applies to me, family size. I have triplets. They're all going to college. And so as far as timing goes, do I preemptively reach out to the schools that we have the best interest in and say, hey, we filed the FAFSA. It tells me that I should be able to pay $60,000 per kid, which clearly is not the reality, and ask them to consider that before they send me, their magic voodoo number, or do I wait until I get it and then appeal?
You absolutely can send that now. Honestly, that's one of the top reasons why I would appeal early. They have no way of knowing this on their side because they're processing thousands of aid applications at the same time. And they're not really going through one by one and seeing, oh, this person has 3 kids. The number that they get from the formula the Department of Education sends them, it's just literally one number. So yes, absolutely do that.
Chris, I had a quick question for you.
Yep, go ahead. And then
All
we have
right.
somebody else who asked. Yep.
So you showed the breakup between the SAI, the cost of attendance, and there's an SAI. I had a situation with the University of Georgia where they granted admission to my daughter, and they said that's not the way it works, and they refused to consider the SAIs. For example, the cost of attendance was $48K, SAI was $38K. My understanding was that the difference, 48 minus 36, $12K, we should get as financial aid. Help me understand if I'm right.
That's the amount of need-based aid that you could be, that's what's defined as your financial need. And so this gets a little bit complicated. And so I might save a walkthrough of what SAI, how it's calculated for the end. But when you're calculating financial aid using that formula, it doesn't mean that's grant money or a reduction in price that the school would have to give you. What it means is that's the amount of money that you're eligible to actually, if using that SAI, you would not be eligible for Pell Grants, and you would not be eligible for another type of grant that's available through the school, but you would be eligible for the student to borrow direct federal loan up to $5,500, and then you would be allowed to borrow $6,500 for a Parent Plus loan. And so that's kind of how that $12,000 will come into play. So they would back to you and say, the way this math works is you're eligible for up to $12,000 in federal loans, but nothing else. Does that make sense?
Okay, gotcha. So they did offer us about 5,500 in loans for our daughter. 3,500 was subsidized and 2,000 was unsubsidized.
Yeah.
But that's all that they offered.
Yeah, so as just to build on what Chris is saying, you had a financial need of $12,000. It doesn't mean that University of Georgia or any college has to actually cover that need.
Okay, gotcha. So
So
it's subjective to them.
kind of. Well, yeah, I to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's subjective to their budget. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay, got the point. Okay.
yeah.
But it's only kind of guaranteed for the Pell Grants that they will get that, right?
If the SAI is below a certain number,
Below
then
8K, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
yeah, you'd be eligible for the Pell Grant. There's
Gotcha.
another type of grant that in tomorrow's email, I'll actually send out the deck that Debbie and I went through previously on how the SAI calculation feeds into an example financial aid award package, in case that's helpful. But hopefully that's helpful.
Yep.
And
Thanks, Chris.
just
Thanks,
again,
Debbie.
just to expand a little bit in your example, is that it's a state school, and state schools just, don't have the flexibility, as much of the flexibility as a private school. A state school can make adjustments for need-based aid if you truly have, special circumstances or changes that aren't reflected in the FAFSA. They usually tend to not be as flexible in offering merit. I mean, there are some state schools that offer merit, but they don't usually, even if you ask for more, they just aren't as flexible in kind of increasing that money. It just comes down to they just don't have it. So again, can't hurt to ask. I would just, from an expectation standpoint, lower your expectations if you're trying to deal with any of the public universities.
Gotcha. Appreciate the clarity of thought. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thanks,
No
Chris.
problem.
Appreciate it.
Cassandra, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify one thing. When we're asking for increased need-based aid, are we basically asking the colleges themselves to provide that aid, or that it's increasing our federal aid?
So it would increase so what you're asking them is to recalculate, in most cases, that student aid index number. And that, depending on what that would come out to, it would make you potentially eligible for more federal aid. Some of that could be grants and some of that could be loans. And if the school has a need-based aid budget, a lot of schools do, some schools don't, then it could make you eligible for significantly more aid from that budget as well. A lot of schools will really use that student aid index number to determine how to allocate their institutional aid as well. And so you want that number to be low. The lower it is, the more aid you're theoretically eligible for. And so if you can get them to reconsider or recalculate it, then you might get more money from them as well.
Okay. And then I made the mistake of calling my daughter's top choice school. We got the aid package, we got the merit package to find out what the process for an aid appeal was. And they basically asked me like, well, why do you think you need one? So I sort of outlined the reasons that I had written in my nice, lovely letter. And he said, I don't qualify. So should I still try to send the full letter because it has a lot more detail than I was able to give him on the phone, or just kind of leave it at that?
For a need-based appeal, maybe let's walk through, I'll try to go through the 12 examples in a minute as quickly as I can, and then see if any of those might apply. And then honestly, this might be a situation where if you wanted to just email me tomorrow after we send this out, I'd be happy to just give you a quick answer. If we have time at the end tonight, I'm also happy to try to give you a quicker, specific answer as well.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I don't, we don't know exactly what you told them, but for need-based aid, if you fall into, one of the 12 things that Chris is going to go through, I mean, they should be willing to review your situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Chris, you got a lot of hands, but do you want to continue a little bit more, or do you want to take some more questions?
How about let's take one more, and then let's come back to these in about 10 to 15 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, how about Clarabelle? You were next. Do you see how to unmute?
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. I have one son in college and one is fixing to go this coming year. So I have a freshman right now and a senior in high school. But with my freshman, we appealed our decision about money, and they literally told me that we had gotten the maxed amount that they could have given us, and I didn't understand how could they have, I mean, even though our what was the when FAFSA gives you like the max number, we were at I think minus 1,500 if I'm not mistaken. Um and she was like, no, well, there's nothing we can do for you. You're already at the max amount. And I was like, well, how? Like, I'm telling you that we're going through like all this hardship, and how are we in the max when we still had to pay, out of pocket, some items or a lot of it. So now having a second child, heading to college, this, fall, I mean, do you think that would eventually help, or every college is different?
Let me answer a quick version of this, and then I might just save further discussion on a more specific case for the end. If your first child is still in school and your second child going to school, one of the key things to remember is that you fill out FAFSA every single year.
Yes.
So this new year, where there's going to be more than one student in the school, there's an opportunity to let that financial aid office, both financial aid offices, know that it's the case and you want to appeal. From a financial aid office perspective, the student aid index number can't go lower than negative 1,500. That makes you eligible for maximum Pell Grant for something called there's another grant that can give you about $4,000, as much work study as that school is allocated. And then the school itself then wouldn't have any more, only if they have an internal need-based budget would they be able to provide you with more money. Otherwise, the only thing they could provide you beyond that would be access to federal student loans, part of which would be subsidized. In that case, some of which would be unsubsidized. So the school would be accurate in what they're saying if they just simply don't have a large need-based budget. But just remember, and as a general overview for everybody, that because you fill out FAFSA every year, you do have an opportunity to appeal every year and have them reconsider anything that might have changed.
So we could probably qualify for higher than the 7,500 that FAFSA gives, or that will be the max out of it.
There's another grant that FSOE that would be up to $4,000 that you might also be eligible for, that 97% of schools participate in. And so that one, maybe shoot me an email tomorrow. So in case that school specifically, I can just look at whether that school also participates in that program to make sure that you should have gotten it.
Are y'all in Texas, or y'all are all United States?
All over.
Okay.
Okay.
But let me just add one thing, Clarabelle. So you should appeal to your son's school where you're a freshman, and you should also appeal to the student, your son that's a high school senior, because that college doesn't know that you've got another child in college at the same time.
Okay, so I can appeal. Okay, no. But my son is a senior in high school.
Right. You have a senior in high school and a freshman in
And a
college?
freshman in college, correct.
Right. This year, you should appeal to both those schools because they both don't know that you've got another child in college at the same time.
So even though he still doesn't have a school, my senior one doesn't have a school. I mean, he's been approved to one, or I think he has 3 offers because he's a football player. But he hasn't like set his mind to one yet. he has to had already been set on one and then appeal it, no? Or how?
No, you just have to have gotten the offers and the information about the aid. He does not have to accept the
Correct.
offer. He just needs to have, the college just needs to have accepted him and given him their financial aid information for you to
Yes.
appeal.
Okay, yeah, because one of them did send us his information and like the grants that he was gonna qualify, the athletic scholarships,
Yeah,
and all that. And I mean, out of
Yeah, so
pocket.
that college doesn't know you have another child, and so they might be willing to kind of readjust your aid once they know that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, alrighty. So can I send you an email, Chris, to get more
Yeah.
information from you?
Yeah, and I'll share that tomorrow.
Perfect. That should work. And I appreciate y'all's answers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go through, I'm going to try to recap the rest of this as quickly as I can so we can really return to Q&A. So 3 buckets. There's a lot of reasons why you might be able to appeal. I'm just going to walk through 12 examples as quickly as I can on some of the more common ones that are more likely to get approved. So as I was mentioning before, the entire income section of FAFSA is based on data from 2 years ago. So if you're applying for FAFSA for the upcoming academic year, it's based on data from 2023. If a year from now, it'll still be outdated. It'll be based on data from 2024. And so this year, if you know that there's been a reduction in income for your household versus what was on your taxes in 2023, you should absolutely let the financial aid office know. They're very used to this. If there's been job loss for one or both parents or either, so you should absolutely let the financial aid office know. This really only works if it's involuntary. If it's a resignation, they are far less likely to consider that when trying to recalculate student aid index. And sometimes when FAFSA automatically pulls in your 2023 income, you might have had a one-time material increase in income for that year. That's not representative of your ongoing income for the household. So if that's the case, you should absolutely let them know. There's no way for them to, all they see is they'll assume that the amount of money that you made in 2023 is still the amount of money that you're making now. If that's gone down for any reason, it is on you to at least let them update the assumption that they're using. And if anybody's receiving child support and there's been a reduction in that amount, the same logic here applies. You just need to let them know that something has changed to the downside. If you're making more money than you did in 2023, you don't need to let them know anything about that. They'll just get reflected in future years. And so general rule for income, it's gone down, let them know. They can literally just change an input on the FAFSA formula itself and your student aid index could go down. Where things get a little bit more interesting is there's a lot of things that FAFSA doesn't let you input. And a lot of those things have to do with expenses that FAFSA has nowhere for you to capture on the application. And so really the common ones that they're used to is if there's unexpected medical expenses, especially those that aren't covered by insurance, if there's chronic illnesses in the family that do strain the family's resources and make it more difficult to pay for college. If you're caring for an elderly or a sick family member, these are all reasons why the financial aid office could take into consideration those extra expenses. And what they would do is say, okay, this family in their FAFSA application has this much in assets. Our standard formula says that this portion of these assets should be available to pay for college. You're giving them new information that lets them go back and say, well, actually, we're going to reconsider this and make an adjustment. we're going to say that instead of this amount of assets being available to pay for college, it's going to be this much smaller amount, since a lot of these assets need to be used to take care of these things that are unavoidable. There's one last thing on this slide. It's less likely that the financial aid office would accept as a reason for appeal, but it's still quite possible. If there's a significant portion of your household's income that has to be spent on non-discretionary expenses, like let's say you've got large student loans already, and those are a strain on resources. There's some legal obligation or other debts that are straining the family's resources. The financial aid office doesn't have to consider it, but in some cases they will consider it. They'll ask you for some documentation and proof around the amount of these things and how much it actually impacts you monthly. And provide them as much as you can, be honest about it, and ask them if they're willing to help. Yeah, and then just the last slide before we get into process to appeal. We already covered what happens if you have a sibling in college. And really, this is pretty standard. Schools, and it actually can apply beyond college. So there are schools that will consider if you have another child who's even in a private high school as additional cost that makes it less likely that you'd be able to pay the amount they think you can for college. So it's on you to let the financial aid office know about any other educational expenses that are impacting your ability to pay for this specific child to go to that college. The high school thing, not as likely to work. The college thing, quite likely to work. If there's been a change in family size, when you fill out FAFSA, there's a question that gets asked about, it pulls in the family size that was reported on your 2023 taxes. And then there's a pop-up that some people skip past kind of quickly that asks you if this is still an accurate family size. And in some cases, a family has grown. If that's happened, and you need to make sure that you updated that number. And it's really important because your student aid index number is heavily influenced by the size of the family that's reported on FAFSA. If the family has grown, the way the formula works is it says you have, I'm going to make up a number right now and say $100,000 of income. For a family of 4 living in New York, we exclude $70,000 of that income and say that that's not available to pay for college. All of it has to go towards helping the family live. If it's a family of 5, then the amount of money available for college shrinks, and that same logic goes forward. So if the family has grown, make sure that you answer that correctly on FAFSA. If you made a mistake, you can correct FAFSA, but you should probably actually just appeal more quickly and let the financial aid office know this. If there's unfortunately been a death of a parent or a guardian, then you really should let FAFSA know as early as you can. From their vantage point, all they can see is what they know about the family based on the information they got in FAFSA itself. And they can absolutely take this into consideration and completely recalculate what's available to pay for college. And then finally, sorry, I'm going a little bit quickly here. If there's been a divorce or a separation after submitting FAFSA, then you should let the financial aid office know. If it happened before submitting FAFSA, then it should already have been reflected in the FAFSA application that you are submitting. All right, I'll pause and see what questions we might have here. And then we'll spend just 5 minutes talking about the process for merit-based appeals.
So somebody asked Chris, can you appeal, or should your letter include, in this case, they said the parents' student loans, but you could just even broaden that to other types of debt that the parents might have.
Yes, you can. Very honestly, there's no guarantee that the financial aid office will take that into consideration, but they might. And so if you're in a position where the financial aid package you're getting says that what's available to you now is some aid plus loans your student should take out, plus parent plus loans, which the parent would then take out to pay for the student's school, it's totally valid to go back to them and say, look, I've already got this much in loans for myself. Is there something you can do to help?
Chris, how about we let Nicole ask her question?
Yeah.
Thanks. So let's say we appeal and we're successful. My concern is if we have to appeal annually, say sophomore year, we're not successful. Like, how does that work? How can you plan? Is there any guarantee that if my personal finances stay the same, that they'll honor the newly appealed aid amount? And then another part to that, or a different part to that question, is the medical expenses are on our tax returns we have like $50,000 annually in medical expenses. Do we need to show additional proof of that, or is the tax return enough?
Do you mind repeating the first part of the question?
Sure. It's about appealing annually.
Yeah. So if you appeal and you're successful this year, depending on the reason that appeal, the reason why you're appealing, you might need to do this every single year. It's really going to be a bit of a case-specific scenario that I'm happy to kind of talk through that if it helps one-on-one. In a lot of cases, though, if you've appealed once, it's something that is going to be a recurring incremental expense. Let's say it's like a chronic medical condition. There's some amount that's reflected on your taxes, but there's ongoing large costs and costs that could theoretically increase over time. That's something you can kind of appeal once, and the financial aid office would likely take into consideration for each subsequent year as well. You might have to remind them, you might have to make sure that there's a way for them to know that that your inputs are a little bit different from what is reflected directly on FAFSA. But I hope that answers the question.
Ultimately, my concern is we appeal, we're granted additional aid for freshman year, and then sophomore year it goes away and we're not able to afford the school.
Yeah. Valid concern. There are certain appeals that carry forward year after year after year, and some where you will have to do it every single year. If it really is this, let's say it's a material change in income, that's something you'd have to do every year. If it's going to be additional costs that are ongoing and uncontrollable, that really is a scenario where you'd have to ask the financial aid office. It's like, hey, this is the scenario. This is what I'm afraid of. Is this something that you can take into consideration for all 4 years? Let's have a quick conversation about it. They are, for scenarios like that, financial aid offices are used to reconsidering the way that they view your financial aid for all 4 years and not just for 1 year.
But it's definitely an important thing to bring up and discuss with whatever school you're appealing to.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to go through just the process really quickly. It's take about 2 minutes, and then we'll return to questions in about 5. So when it comes to a need-based appeal, to start off with, a lot of schools actually now have a portion on their financial aid website that describes the process. For some, it's a box where you actually fill out some things. You may have to attach a document and you write your letter in there. For others, this is the email address to send appeals to. And this is our timeline and process for getting back to you. you'll typically be asked for a formal appeal letter. And in this, you're describing what is the specific reason why I think the inputs into my FAFSA didn't fully capture my financial picture. And so the 12 that we went through are totally valid. There are other ones as well that can be valid. I'm happy to answer any of those one-on-one. But that's what you're doing. You're saying these are the reasons why I think you should change. You should reconsider how much I'm eligible for. You will likely be asked for some sort of supporting documentation for any of those reasons. And you might just want to be prepared for that. Some schools won't ask you for that up front. Some will. And the real important thing to consider here is actually that schools are now required to have a process for you to appeal need-based aid. Before last year, they didn't have to let you do this. Now they actually do. And so if you're at all worried about this, really don't be, because they are used to it now. They will at least consider your appeal on a case-by-case basis. They should already be publicly disclosing what their process and timeline looks like. And while there really isn't a guarantee that they're going to give you more money, this is the same principle that we had with merit-based aid appeals. The absolute worst thing that can happen is that you're going to hear a no. Skip the slide, but it's not terribly important. Give me maybe just 2 minutes to intro you to Juno really quickly, and then I'm happy to answer as many questions as people might have. And before we do that, sorry, one more slide on this need-based appeal section. I get asked this a lot. There are reasons why it's incredibly unlikely, if not impossible, that the financial aid office would consider a need-based appeal. So if when you filled out FAFSA, you submitted your asset values, you didn't include retirement accounts in there because they don't go into FAFSA. If the market's gone down and your 401k has gone down, that has nothing to do with FAFSA and financial aid. Really don't even bring that up. When you filled out FAFSA, you did record the value of your investments, whether that is your rental property, stocks, bonds, or other things, and you recorded the value as of the day that you submitted FAFSA. If those values have gone down since you submitted FAFSA, the school won't consider that in reassessing the amount of aid that you're eligible for. If you're writing to the school to say that you're the parent and you don't want to contribute to or take loans to pay for the school, for the student's education, that's not going to change the answer that you get from the school in most cases. And so just kind of consider some of these. Is what you're really looking for is additional information that you can give them besides changes in your assets since you submitted FAFSA, but not these things. And just one really quick overview from this past week and things that are valuable to know. Some of you might have seen headlines yesterday and the day before that federal funding for different types of loan and grant programs was on pause for a temporary review. Just as a quick update on that, according to the Department of Education, federal student loans and Pell Grants were never actually included in that pause. And so this has been a recurring question. That's really not something that you need to worry about right now. You should move forward with completing FAFSA if you haven't yet and appealing your aid. And you really should be able to count on the versions of federal student aid that exist today to pay for this upcoming year. For future years, there might be some changes that happen. I was speaking to Debbie about this 2 hours ago. As we learn more about these changes, we'll likely update everybody. There's one key thing that might impact, likely not this year, but potentially next year, there might be a change in Parent Plus loans and a phase out. It probably won't impact anybody listening to this right now. And so you might start hearing headlines. In all likelihood, I just want you to take away that as alarmist as some headlines might be, the way that some legislation is currently drafted says that if you are going to get access to and use a Parent Plus loan this year, that you would be able to use it for each subsequent year that your student is in school, but it would then get phased out. And so just as a quick reminder, there are likely going to be some changes that are coming to the federal student lending and grant landscape, but some of those changes might actually be beneficial to undergraduate students and parents, and some of the other changes that wouldn't be beneficial probably wouldn't impact people who have children going to college this year, but they might impact things for subsequent years. And honestly, I'm happy to get into those at the end, and I think we'll probably honestly end up doing an AMA session at some point in the next month or two to go through whatever those updates end up being. I gave you a really brief intro to Juno earlier, and want to give you a little bit more detail. So I've spent the last 7 years running this group negotiation process, where you can think of Juno as something like Costco for finance. What we do is group together large amounts of people who need to get a financial product for the fall semester, and we ask lenders to compete on the terms and the rates that they would offer to members of our group. So we're always just trying to see, can we get something better for a few thousand people at a time than if you just Google best student loan. The larger we grow this group, the more leverage we have to convince lenders to do things they wouldn't otherwise want to do. And really my only ask is, maybe back up for a second. We don't charge anybody anything to join Juno. We don't run your credit. We don't share your information with anybody. This is really just like signing up for a mailing list. Between now and the end of April, what I'm trying to do is get interest from as many people who could possibly need a loan for the fall. Even if you don't use it, it doesn't matter. But the more people who actually sign up and say it's possible that I might need a loan, the more negotiating leverage I have in the background for our team to talk to banks and then to get them to submit bids in May. They're submitting bids on the rates they would offer to our member base. On June 1st, we make those available to everybody. Nobody has to use it. Nobody has to do anything at all. But the larger the size of the group, the likelier it is that we're able to convince lenders to reduce the amount of money they make on each loan in exchange for getting the business of a large number of people. And so if you are at all interested in this, there's a link at the bottom of this page. I think Debbie will send it out tomorrow as well, where you can sign up. It really takes about a minute, less than 2 minutes. We truly don't share your information with anybody, not even the lenders. All I really do in the background is say, okay, Bank A, we now have 19,000 people who are requesting this much in total loan volume, and from these different graduation years, can you use that total size of demand to estimate what's the best that you could do for people in each bucket? It's a free option. It's a little bit of a different type of product than what you might normally see, but hopefully it's helpful. A lot of people have used it over the last couple of years. And with that, I will just turn to general Q&A.
Okay. So Chris, there's a few questions, and Linda, I know you raised your hand. We'll get to you 1 second. People were asking, can they appeal for both merit and need-based aid, like at the same time in the same letter?
That's a good question. There's not, so theoretically, yes. Each school is going to have a slightly different process for the need-based aid piece, though. And so some schools might still point you to their portal for need-based aid appeals and say, this is the exact structure of the appeal that we want to hear, and these are the documents you support for this. And they might look at that separately. So while you can do it all together, you might be asked to do it separately.
Chris, I'll just ask this. It's not about the appeal process, but just related to your description of Juno. Somebody's asking, like, what's the general interest rate or the average interest rate that you've been able to negotiate to for, if somebody goes through Juno?
Sure. Let me answer this a slightly different way. So in about 3 months, we're going to do a webinar on all things related to student loans. In that, we're going to talk about how really the only time to consider a private loan is if you can get a better offer than what you get through the Parent Plus product that the federal government offers. And what I can say is our objective is, and people only use us when they're getting a lower rate than what they get from Parent Plus. Last year, I'll give you the quick example, Parent Plus was a little bit over 9%, and people had to pay a 4% origination fee. The people who used Juno, the parents to pay for undergrad, obviously got below that 9% with 0 origination fee. Now, the actual rate that people get is then contingent on your income and in some cases, the state. So we absolutely had some people, especially those who are from Texas or going to school in Texas, get rates in the low 5s for a 10-year fixed loan last year or this past summer. And a lot of people are getting rates for parent loans in the 7% range for a 10-year product. Now, I really just want to be wary about quoting a number because that varies from person to person. And these are numbers from last year in a different rate environment than we are today. But we have every reason to believe that we'll be able to do something as good, if not better, for this coming summer.
Greg, sorry, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you very much for having this session. It's been really super helpful. My student is admitted to 2 state schools with very similar academic reputations, but very different tuition things. I heard earlier talking about we have, if you have aid from one, bringing that to the other, can you make the same argument or hopefully make the same argument just based on tuition rates when there isn't aid involved?
And just out of curiosity, are you out of state in both these cases, or is
the in-state one is much more affordable than the out-of-state one? The out-of-state one is much more desirable to the student.
I don't know, Chris, what your opinion is, but I think you're going to have a hard time comparing in-state to out-of-state offers.
There was somebody else who asked in the chat about, does out-of-state have more room to move since they're typically a lot higher than in-state? So it's kind of a related question on that too.
It's a really good question. This is probably the hardest one to answer because there's not an answer that I could give you that wouldn't be me making something up.
I appreciate that.
Maybe like that, if I could give you just spitballing here, to be totally honest, based on what I know. Think of it as in some way the school is trying to maximize the number. It has 100 seats. It wants to make sure that it can fill all 100 seats. Your ability to get that school to give you a discount if you're out of state is going to be harder to do now than it is getting closer to the start of the semester or later in the summer.
Okay.
They're likely going to, and probably, I know in some states, required to prioritize those in-school or in-state students. It's a hard question. I wish I had a clear answer.
Oh, thanks for your thoughts on it. I appreciate it.
I mean, yeah, I'll just add again, the only downside of the process is your time. So give it a shot. I can give you my assumptions of maybe probabilities, but it almost doesn't matter. I would just give it a try and see what happens.
We will do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sarah, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. So my daughter has been accepted to two schools that offered aid, with their acceptance in January. She applied early action to three schools. I've appealed. I had one of those kind of one-time income sources. So I actually have about a 32% reduction in what my 2023 income looks like. So I have appealed those two. The third choice, third school, which is actually her first choice school, deferred her to regular decision. So she will not hear from that school and get their aid package until April 1st, which is going to turn into a tight turnaround to appeal and get an answer and, make a decision by May 1st. So I was wondering if I should go ahead and reach out to the financial aid office, or if she should, of that third school, so that we get possibly best case scenario, a more accurate offer. It is a meets needs school, so I think it would be significant that we have a 30-something% reduction.
Yeah, Sarah, this is going to be an easy one. Absolutely, yes. This is a case because of this timeline situation where, because they haven't yet given you the information back yet, you can reach out to them and let them know that this is the case, and you just want them to, because you've sent them FAFSA information. This third school has been included likely in that drop down in your FAFSA of the schools that you send information to.
Correct. We have done FAFSA and CSS for the school.
Yeah. And so you absolutely can let them know now that, hey, this is the situation, and I just want to let you know. Now, there's one, this is a meets needs, this is one big caveat here, and I'm pretty sure Debbie will probably say the same thing. I'm assuming this is a meets needs school that is truly the kind with the endowment that won't change their opinion on admission based on whether they need to provide incremental aid. And if it's a need aware versus a need blind school, then to be very honest with you, a need aware school might take that into consideration when deciding whether to admit your child or not. And in that case, you might want to hold off on asking them to consider that change until later.
Okay, and can I Google and research what the need aware versus is that? I get, yeah, I mean, I know it's need, but I'll look into it. Thank you.
Sure.
So I just want to mention one thing, and then we'll continue answering questions that somebody sent me a note about, and I think it's a great comment. I'll just read what they said, and then you can add anything that you want, Chris. But this person said, one thing that hasn't been mentioned tonight so far is that some schools, especially private schools that are not elite, are really needing students. So appeals are likely to be way more successful at those schools than the ones that turn away thousands of qualified students every year. People appealing should know this. So basically what they're saying is, it's just a supply and demand, situation. So those schools, the very selective schools, are always going to have more applications than they have seats. And so they're always going to be able to be selective. And quite honestly, that's why those schools don't give out merit scholarships. They're usually the need-based. They give out a lot of need-based aid because they don't need to attract more students. The students are already coming. And then there's I would call it a second tier of schools that are great value, good education, but but have to work harder to make families aware of who they are. And they tend to be generous in merit. And as this person is reminding us to remind you, if your student applied to one of those schools and got accepted and you appeal, they're probably going to continue to be generous with merit and be likely to increase whatever it is that they offered. So just something to keep in mind. It's a little bit late in the process, but if you ever came to any of our earlier sessions, like when your student was in 11th grade or before they applied, that's why we focus so much on those, generous merit schools, because they're still great schools, but they have to work harder at marketing themselves. And so they are willing and more generous with the money that they give initially, and usually if you appeal to them as well.
Great points all around. I see a question here that Debbie and Benjamin brought up that I think so clear that other people have asked as well. So the question for everybody is, let's say your student is going to an admitted students weekend at a school. Can the parents meet with the financial aid office while the student is in the regular structured programming? And it's going to depend on a school by school basis, but yeah, honestly, absolutely. In a lot of cases you can. To be totally honest, I know that my parents did, and they appealed my aid for undergrad. That's how some of this ended up working out. So just make sure that you, a lot of schools will already have an office hours set up for parents and or sometimes just for the student with financial aid. Message them, either email or phone call before, and see if you could just set up some time, or if there's already a process to do that.
So, Chris, maybe you can repeat what you said earlier, and I might have responded to some people with some different information about, do people should they be waiting for multiple, or should they be waiting to get their aid offer before appealing, and should they be waiting for at least getting at least 2 offers before appealing if they want to have a comparison?
So for merit-based aid, you do need some offer to be able to appeal. And it's just generally help. Let's say that you've gotten admitted to 2 schools. You got an aid offer from one, like a really good aid offer, but you want to go to the second school, and the second school hasn't yet sent a financial aid offer. It could be helpful to appeal this early, but it's, in that case, you're not appealing the second. Let's say you want to go to that second school more than the one that already gave the information. In that case, it's not an appeal. You're just providing incremental information, saying, hey, I know that you're still working financial aid package. I just wanted to let you know that this happened. Can you take that into consideration? This is the school that we really want to go to, and we want to make a quick decision and then commit to your school. Help us make that happen. So just make sure that you're phrasing it that way. It's not technically an appeal. You can absolutely do it before you get the financial aid letter from that program. But some of them, just be prepared. They might just tell you to wait to see what they send you anyway. There's not a huge financial aid staff at every school. They're doing a lot of work in very narrow periods of time, and so they just might not have time. For the need-based aid portion, there's a lot of the reasons that we talked about. You can absolutely let the school know before they even process your financial aid letter. And because really what you're doing here is saying, I already know, we looked at some of these reasons, these apply to me. I already know that the information that I submitted on FAFSA does not fully reflect my family's financial picture. If the answer to that is yes, let the financial aid office know as early as possible. They, in many cases, might even prefer it so that they don't have to do work more than once.
Quick question about Juno, Chris, which I hadn't really, I don't know the answer. Somebody's asking if they have multiple students, do they need different Juno accounts?
You don't need multiple Juno accounts. good question. You could use the same exact account and the same links for everything that we offer.
This is just a question about a what if related to some of the potential changes that might come down the line. Somebody's asking if they phase out Parent Plus loans, what would be the alternatives?
So I'm going to give what I actually know about this so far. So about 12 months ago, the first text of something called the College Cost Reduction Act was released. It never got passed, but right now, some of the discussion happening on Capitol Hill is about taking elements of that bill and putting them into a budget bill that's being discussed over the next couple of weeks. In that College Cost Reduction Act, the language would say that if you have used a Parent Plus loan this year, you'd be able to use it for your student each subsequent year until they graduate. But if, let's say, your student is going to school next year for the first time and this bill has passed, then there's two potential things that could help you. While you might not get access to Parent Plus anymore, there are elements of that version of the bill that would increase the size of Pell Grants. So theoretically, you might get more money that doesn't have to be paid back. And it's also possible that the limit on how much the student can borrow directly would increase materially above where it's at today. One of the issues with federal student lending right now is that a lot of it is that the student can borrow money at a much lower rate with better terms than a parent can, but that is capped at $5,500 for freshman year. And so this would say, let's just get rid of Parent Plus, which is a lot more expensive, but allow the student to get more than $5,500. Totally unknown what that cap would be. And at least the way that the legislation was initially written, the theoretical cap of where that would get to would not be enough for a lot of schools that are more expensive than the median school in the US. And in those cases, then either schools will need to reduce their costs a little bit over time, or there would need to be private market alternatives to Parent Plus.
Oh, there was a question also about, do parents or do families appeal before or after applying for loans?
Likely far before. Truly the biggest value of an appeal here is to make sure you can get as much money from the school and from the federal government that you don't have to pay back. And so this appeal process is really meant to reduce the amount you'd have to pay out of pocket. And hopefully all of that gets done before you even decide which school your child is going to attend. And that should likely be happening 3 months or more before you would need to get a loan anyway.
Somebody had asked earlier, Chris, when you were going through the different reasons why you would do appeal for need-based aid, and they asked, is there a certain percentage, like threshold, that would constitute a significant change in somebody's income?
So it's a great question. In some cases, what might seem like a big, so I'm going to answer this with a big, it depends, but I'm going to think about whether I can provide you with, here's what I'll do. When I say it depends, it's because the formula that determines your student aid index number is based on both your income and your assets. And so if you had a change in income, it could be a big change in income, but if your assets were high enough, it might make zero difference in the amount of aid you'd be eligible for. And so there's a slide that we walked people through about 2 months ago in a presentation for understanding student aid index in depth. And what you can kind of look at on that slide is what your student aid index would be there's a theoretical scenario of a 4-person household. On one column is income, on the rows is assets. Just take a quick glance at this. If you see kind of where you are and just look at how much student aid index would change if your income reported on FAFSA went down by a certain amount. And that's a quick guide to just help you understand what the impact could be. And if you want to get into more detail than that, I'm happy to talk about it more.
The
I'll
one other
do that tomorrow.
Yeah, the one other thing I'll add is that if your income has changed because you became unemployed, a lot of times the colleges want to wait they won't make a change because they want to at least like give you 6 months, assuming that you might get a new job within 6 months. So they might come back and say something like that. There's a question about if people can appeal for more of the SEOG grants.
Yes. So when you're appealing your financial aid, the way the FSEOG is calculated is if your amount of need is so you can get up to $7,395 for a Pell Grant. That's the first thing that gets allocated when you demonstrate financial need. And then you can get up to $4,000 of FSEOG if the school participates in the program. And so if your financial need is greater than $11,400 and the school participates in it, and if your SAI is typically below 0, then you're very likely to get that. And the reason I say that is the key thing here is FSEOG is allocated by the school. Each school can have its own methodology for how it prioritizes financial aid applicants to get that money. But the vast majority of schools will simply give the FSEOG money to people who have an SAI of 0 or lower.
So there's one last question about the different loan amounts that colleges give. So person is saying, I've noticed that some schools have given different unsubsidized and subsidized loans. Why are they all different?
Really good question. So let me go back to just this slide. So remember, if you have it's a little bit complicated to answer. The reason why is your student aid index, that number is not going to change from one school to the next, unless you appeal, but I won't get into that caveat. Let's just assume your student aid index is the same from one school to the next. The cost of attendance for some schools is different than it is at other schools. And so your financial need is cost of attendance minus your student aid index. Let's say your student aid index is 10,000, the school costs 20,000. There's $10,000 of financial need in one school. You take, but let's say another school is $25,000. And so it's 25,000 minus 10, you have $15,000 in need for the other school. That 10 and that $15,000 is a number that the financial aid office sees. And then what they're doing is saying, okay, how do I break this down by the rules that I have for the Department of Education? Those rules say that I'm supposed to give you Pell Grants up to the amount you're legally eligible for. You might get FSEOG, you might get work study. If there's need left after those are added up together, then I'm supposed to give you up to a certain amount of subsidized federal loans. If there's more need after I hit the cap on how much that can have, I can give you for that. Then I give you the remainder up to $5,500 of unsubsidized loans. So there's just a stack. The financial aid office they're trying to play Tetris with financial aid because the cost of attendance number is different for each school. And because some schools have a larger work study budget than others, some schools end up giving you a bunch of subsidized aid, some give you no subsidized aid. It's going to vary from one place to the next.
Okay, I think hopefully we've given you guys a lot to think about, a lot to start working with. And I put Chris's email in the chat, but we can include it in the email that you'll get tomorrow. And you know, feel free to continue to reach out with questions. And of course, we'd like to hear results, you know, good and bad, but let us know if you do appeal and you get some sort of answer back. We'd love to know that.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time tonight. And please do reach out if there's anything we can do.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Have a good night.